So we're going to explore some of the basics of processing, how to get yourself started. We're looking at a blank screen right now, but very quickly we'll be able to do some pretty interesting things, fairly sophisticated things. So this is your root area, what we might call root. Just to mention that this is kind of an area of the sketch, and most other areas are delimited by these curly brackets. Okay, so you'll have some kind of word here that says something. In our case, like void setup. Okay, you'll usually have these parentheses. Those are left for arguments, which we'll get into later. But if there are no arguments, you always have to include those parentheses. And then you'll have the scope, which is defined by these curly brackets. So everything within that is sort of another section of processing, this called the setup. Okay. Let me just, and also Command T is handy because it'll tidy everything up. Command T tidies everything up. Okay. So sometimes I'll be referring to root, which is just everything else. Sometimes I'll be referring to this thing called setup, which is everything that's in these curly brackets. And then there's another section called draw, so void draw. Now let's not worry too much about what the void means right now. Essentially, these are what are called methods or functions, and they can return things. So if you want that function to return, say, a number or an integer, you just put int instead of void. Void just means you're not actually returning anything with that particular function. Okay, so setup and draw, these are some basic things to get you started. Okay, if I was to run this, nothing happens really. It gives you this little square sort of postage stamp looking thing. All right, setup is just how it's described. It's a setup area. It basically allows you, it's run once when you start the program, and it's just allows you to sort of define variables, set things up, a bunch of little things that need to get done before you start drawing anything. So that just runs once. Everything in setup runs once, and it runs first at the very beginning. All right. A draw now is our actual sort of the heart of this program. It runs in a loop. So it runs over and over again, and it runs everything in draw. Any code you put in draw gets run in order, and it gets run over and over again after setup, but setup just runs once. And it runs at a frame rate, now depending on how fast your computer is. Oftentimes it's 60 frames a second, and so it runs 60 times a second over and over again. It loops. So everything in it, that's how you get that sense of drawing. So if you have something that, you draw a line, it'll draw that line once, 60 times a second. Okay, so typical things you put in setup, we'll start with are the size of your sort of canvas, the size of your working area. So that's use the function size. Oops. And I'll make mine say 800 by 600. Okay, so that'll make the size. So if I run that, you can also use Command R to run. That's a handy shoe. Now it's 800. It's a little postage stamp of 800 by 600. Okay, and then draw is where you draw things. So oftentimes you'll have a background color. So background basically paints a color over the entire canvas once every draw frame. So that's background, and then you use a RGB system. So 0 is black, 255 is white, red is 25500, green, so it's RGB. That'd be a green background. Then obviously 00255 would be blue. There's a nice color selector here they have, so you can move your little thing around, pick a color that you like, and then it'll give you the RGB values or a hex value if you want. Okay, so that's quite handy. So if I run this, I'll have a green background. That's 800 by 600. Okay, now just to show you what the background basically just draws a big square around that. So if I want to draw a line on top of that, let's do just an ellipse actually. There's these things called fill and stroke. So you have I'm just going to say no stroke, We'll go over these later, but just bear with me for now. And I'll have a fill. Oh yeah, I mentioned already. So 0 would be black and 255 would be white. So, and then I'll draw a little ball, and then I'll put it at 100, 100. I'll make it 50, 50 wide, and we'll go over these shapes later. Okay, so it's going to draw a little ball there. All right, just to show you background. So background runs first. It runs in order. Background takes away the stroke. It makes a fill of black, and then it draws a little ball, an ellipse. Now, were I to move the background after the ellipse, you no longer see the ball because it's drawing the ball, but it's just painting the background over it. So it does that every, it draws that, right, about 60 times a second. Okay, and let me show you what background does. I mean, I think you probably get it, but just to not put too fine a point on it, if I try to move the ellipse a little bit, okay, let's just have an int x equals 100. We'll start at 100, and then we'll put this x, and we'll say x plus plus. Okay, so now what's going on? It's drawing this green background. It's doing the stroke things. It's drawing the ball, and it's starting it at x equals 100, and then it's incrementing x. It's adding 1 to x. So the next time around it'll be 101, the next time around 102. Now realize that it's happening 60 times a second. So even though a pixel is very small, it's going to move 1 pixel 60 times in 1 second. It'll move 60 pixels in 1 second, basically. Okay, about. Okay, so that ball moves across the screen. There we go. Now, so you see in just a few lines of code there, I already have an animation going on. It's quite easy to use. We'll get into the particulars of animation, but basically this is more to demonstrate what background does. Now, if I was to take out the background, so commenting out is used. It's kind of a common, if you've done any programming, this is fairly common. // comments a single line out, / asterisk, and then asterisk / comments a paragraph out. So as long as you have these 2 tags, that to open the area and that to close the area. All right, so let's comment out the background and run it, and you'll see that it just draws this kind of this swath now. So you see what's happening with draw, and this is a good way to demonstrate that, is it's doing this 60 times a second. So it's drawing the background, then drawing the ellipse on top of the background, and then incrementing x, and then drawing the background again over so it erases the ball, but then drawing the ball back on top of the background. So that's why you get just a single ball. Without the background, it's drawing the ball, it's moving it over, drawing the ball again on top of the last ball, and it's drawing the ball again on top of the last ball before that. So you get that sort of thing. So just to again, to emphasize what draw actually does. It's a little bit like those flip books that, I don't know, I used to play with as a kid. Used to buy them in Disneyland, I remember. You'd have like Mickey Mouse waving at you or something like that. You'd flip, you'd buy it looks like a book, and you'd flip through it, and Mickey Mouse would be waving at you, or kicking Goofy, or something like that. And basic animation, the way it works. Each page is a slightly over, and if you flip them quick enough, it looks like it's moving. So the same thing with draw. It's presenting one image, and then very quickly presenting another image after that, another image after that. If you make these incremental changes, you get animation. All right. So that's basically, it's kind of a long-winded introduction, but these are the basic areas: setup, draw, and root. You notice I put this variable on the root. That means it's a global variable. It's accessible everywhere. Okay. So even though setup has this sort of defined scope, if I was to put int x equals 0 within here, it wouldn't be accessible to draw. It would only be accessible within that scope. Okay, but once it's on root, it's accessible everywhere, even within these brackets. All right, so that's a global area, global variable. And we talked about what draw does, what setup. It runs once and then it stops. And then right, and we talked a little bit about scope and such. So these are the things that you probably have for just about every sketch, just to avoid setup and avoid draw, and you'll see ways which we use them, you know, to fairly complicated uses in the future. Okay, so let's wrap that up there.